Welcome back to part 2 of Dr. Faraz's IMG success story. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, I need to stop you right here and send you over there to listen to his story. Dr. Faraz is a psych accredited trainee. He's an IMG from India. And in part 1, he explains how he went through the whole process, studied for AMC, and managed to find himself a job. So please listen to that first. If you already have, welcome back. Now let's listen to Dr. Faraz as he continues to tell us his story. So that's amazing. So you got the job, and so when was your start date? How soon were you going to start work?
So I got the notification of the job halfway through May. That was May of 2019. And they told me that I'm due to start my job in July. And it seemed quite unreal. Although they said that I was supposed to go start my work in July, I was now freaking out about a different thing. Now that I had the job, I couldn't believe that I could work until I actually stepped into a hospital to work, because I didn't just have APRA registration. I also had to get a job visa. And mind you, the other 3 people that I was with in my cohort of observers all had Australian citizenships. So they could have had a doctor who could have started working the next day after their registration.
Yeah.
But they still chose to go with the one who didn't.
That says something.
So it's not rocket science. There's no way you will not get a job. It's not something to overthink about. Just you've got to be naturally what you would do if you're genuinely working in a hospital. And I'll explain that a bit more in detail later, how you would or what you would do. But it's very basic.
Yeah.
All right. So I got the job. They said I was due to start in July, but lesser known fact, I actually started working in November.
Yeah, APRA takes forever.
Yes. So that's something you've got to be prepared for, that more often than not, after you get a job, you end up losing one term at least. Because if you have your visa in order, if you have working rights in Australia, then a minimum of 3 to 3.5 months from APRA to do your registration, and then and then you start working. But if you don't have your visa, so keep that. That's 3.5 months for registration and about a month for your visa processing to take place. They're pretty good at it. My advice would be, yes, it does cost a bit of money, but if you can, just get all your paperwork and your affairs in order through an agent who can help you with all of this. Because if they can help you compile all documents into one place, all you've got to do is the second you get your registration, you send your registration certificate to them and they apply for you.
What are these agents and where are they located? And how'd you find one?
So if you Google immigration agents in your state and...
in your Australian state or back home?
No, in Australia.
Okay.
In Australia. So just Google migration agent. That's what they're called. Migration agents and whatever state you're in, say migration agent Queensland.
So the state that you're going to work in or the state that you're physically in at the moment?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter because I had an agent from one state when I'd applied for a job in another one.
Okay.
So you can get and these agents, they all work remotely because all they need from you is to send them documents, which is all online now.
Can you also do this if you're in another country?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because it's all your communication to these people is via email anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
So they've got quite set prices about how much they charge. So it roughly costed me about $1,000 to get all my visa paperwork sorted. There are a lot of migration agents. I mean, to be honest, I didn't do too much research over here because at this point I got a bit too excited that I had a job. So I just chose the first one that I found. But if you find different ones, they're probably more helpful and cheaper. So it'll cost you roughly around $600 to $1,200 if I'm giving a rough ballpark about how to get your paperwork in order. But if you're very good at and you're very patient with immigration websites, and that is my biggest pet peeve, an immigration website is possibly, the Australian immigration website is the most difficult website to navigate because it takes you hyperlink to hyperlink to hyperlink, and then you're stuck somewhere and you're like, okay, I can apply for all of these visas, but which one of these actually apply to me?
Yeah.
So long story short, find yourself a migration agent, which is what I did. And from what I am seeing now, ever since I've moved to Australia. My APRA registration was possibly the quickest. It was about 2 months, less than 2.5 months. And my visa took about a month.
Yep.
So that was August. I had to apply in July because I got my contract then. I applied in July. So it took July, August, and end of August I got my APRA. And then September, well, midway through September actually. And then a bit of September and October took me my work visa to come through. And then I started working in November. So it was about 4 months since I was due to start that I started working.
Yeah.
And because when I started, it was already about halfway through, almost halfway through a rotation, because the hospital that I started working in, they do each rotations for about 3 months, a little over 3 months. So I had only a month and a half and my contract was expiring.
So when you started, what was your position? What was your title?
So it's a different position which is synonymous with different 3-letter abbreviations in different states. Where I started, I was called an RMO, a resident medical officer.
So you started as a junior doctor.
A junior doctor.
Yep.
So
and what rotations what was the first rotation that you did?
Well, I had about less than a month of work in stroke.
Yep.
And I had to really prove myself in that month, because when I went to go see the director and I said to her that I know I was supposed to start in July, but unfortunately that's the nature of paperwork these days, that it takes so long. She was appreciative and understanding, and in very sophisticated and simple terms, she told me, you've got to prove yourself in the next 4 to 6 weeks. If you can prove yourself, then we'd be happy to renew your contract, but it really depends on your performance.
Wow, that doesn't actually give you, because like reality is most people can't prove themselves in 4 weeks. I certainly don't think I could have. So that puts a lot of pressure on you to get another contract. Otherwise, you finally got your foot in the door and you got no contract after a month, no contract renewal.
No, absolutely. And I think it was still not real, because when I first got the job, the next stressor I had was APRA registration, and the next one was a visa. And then I'm like, oh gosh, I've just got 1 month left on my contract, and now I need to work hard for another one. So it was still not very real for me. And I told myself I would not believe that I'm working in Australia until I have that additional contract.
Yeah, and it's important that people understand that you weren't given a 1-year contract, because if you start halfway through the year, so some places will give 1 year, some places will give 2 years, but if you start halfway through the year, they always do the contract up to the set date in January that they have new doctors that on board. So in your case, it's like you got almost like from July to January the date. So that's why you only had a little bit of time.
Exactly. And most hospitals usually start, I think, in the second Monday of January.
Yeah.
So that's when mine was expiring as well.
Okay. So you definitely have the renewed contract, and now you got a full year's contract. And the next thing that you did, because you didn't have AMC2, the next thing you did was WBA.
Yes. Immediately as soon as I got my contract, I contacted the WBA manager, did all the paperwork that was needed, got onto the program, got my blueprint, as they like to call it. It's just basically what that means is you have an assessor for each month, and these assessments are what you go through.
Yep.
So I got that for the year. I kept going through it one by one, and in this year I did an initial term of nights, and then COVID hit, and then I went to orthopedics.
That was clearly your best rotation.
Yes, orthopedics. Oh, good God.
And it was clear that's where you met me.
Yes,
so that's your best. That's why I'm just going to put it out there. It was the best rotation you've ever had, and so much fun.
Oh, absolutely.
You had Caroline on your team.
Just a side note, the only reason I survived that rotation was because of Caroline. Otherwise, I have serious issues with surgeons, in particular orthopedicians. No offense to you all, but I just...
It was a very, very challenging rotation. Like, I put my people skills to the test.
Yes. That rotation...
We were bonded through trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the nicest thing you could say about that rotation. Well, and then after that, what I did was when I was asked about my rotations or my areas of interest, I knew that as an IMG, I need to get my basic rotations done, which is your 8 weeks of emergency, 10 weeks of medicine, 10 weeks of surge.
Yeah.
So I had my medicine done when I did a bit of stroke, and the hospital at nights, part of it was still a bit of medicine. So the hospital said, we can get you the medicine rotation, don't worry about it. And then I did my surgical rotation, which was in orthopedics, and I went to ED. So because I'd done all of these three in the first half of the first 3 quarters of the year, I had an option to choose my last rotation. So I told the director that my area of interest is psychiatry. Would it be possible for me to get a rotation in it? And because more often than not, hospitals tend to give you your choice of rotation, but they'll end up making you do something that they want.
Yeah.
So in my case, that was orthopedics. So anyway, I had to get through a surgical term. So I decided, well, doesn't matter what rotation it is. I'm going to hate it anyway. So, but I did it just because I needed to tick that box. And then I went into psychiatry as an RMO. Completely different world from the hospital that I'd worked in. I loved it. From the day I stepped onto the ward, I absolutely fell in love with that place. Just the medicine behind it, the unrecognized medicine behind it. And granted, I had an excellent boss at that time who was a very good tutor. And this is a consultant I'm talking about, not just the registrar. So he would just not shy away from answering any questions you would ask him, just constantly keep explaining things to you, break it down, dumb it down for you at a student's level. And that's how I got all my basics. And I realized this is what I wanted to do. So the next year when they were allocating rotations again, I went to the director and I said, I know this is too much to ask, but I want 2 more rotations of psychiatry because I think this is going to be my career pathway. And I don't see myself doing anything else apart from this.
And I'll just pause you on that because you said, I know this is too much to ask. And this is something like IMGs versus locals. Locals aren't shy for asking what they want. They'll go up to the director of clinical training. They're like, I want this. And as IMGs, we're like, look, I will do like the whole year of nights if you give me 1 rotation in this area that I'm interested in. Like we feel like we can't ask, and if we do, we have to give something massively in return. But the locals ask, they demand actually, if anything, and for not to get, and they don't negotiate. They don't go, okay, I will do this horrible rotation if you give me ICU. They're just like, this is what I want. I want ICU or I'm leaving to another hospital. So I always say with IMGs, you need to go for it. If this is what you want, don't wait for it to come and fall on your lap. Go approach your director of clinical training and ask for it.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. There's always that element that we shy away a little bit. And I did the same thing. I was scared that I might not get my rotation. And I really wanted to, well, it sounds wrong, but I just basically wanted to barter my way into getting the rotations I wanted or negotiate. So I went up to her and I said, I will do, if you can give me 2 rotations of psychiatry, please, then I'm happy to do the next 3 months of nights and another term of whatever you want me to do. And she had a lot to think about it because she's like, oh, I thought I would give you pediatrics because you said you wanted that. But by then I had my heart set on psychiatry and I didn't want to lose that momentum that I was building with the bosses over there, because let's be honest, it was all about it is always about out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So if as long as I'm there, I've got to make the right connections. And by this time, first 3 months, I was just expressing my interest to the bosses, just the consultants, very superficially. Yes, I really am interested. I think this is what I want to do, just on superficially. And one day I decided, right, I need to again get out of my shell, stop being scared of anything, anyone. So I walked up to the director of psychiatry and I told him, I'm interested in psychiatry. How do I get about to be a registrar?
And we're going to have an entire podcast on exactly that process that you went through, because obviously that's information in itself. It's going to be long, and we need to really break it down because it is quite a full-on process.
It was,
so we need to
absolutely,
definitely
yes.
interrogate you on that. So, so you got your did you get your 2 rotations in psych?
Yes, I got my 2 rotations in psych, and then I ended up getting a rotation in nights and medical relief.
Oh,
And the second I saw my roster, I mentally had a note set in my head that come what may, I am going to get into the program before I hit that rotation of nights. Not that I didn't like nights, because I think that was the best term that I had in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
I learned so much because of the autonomy I had and also the right amount of support.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's very important. But I think maybe it's just me that I functioned really well with being thrown in the deep end. But remember that there's always help for you. You just have to ask. If you don't ask, you won't get. And that's the biggest problem with us IMGs, is that we're so scared to ask. But what's the most that's going to happen? They'll tell you that they don't know. Or they'll just say, you should know this. And you tell them, all right, well, I don't know, and I'll try and learn and be a bit better next time. And that's fine with them. So but even by this time, I hadn't gotten my general registration. So although I finished my WBA, it took a while for all of that to happen.
Yeah.
And then I got my 2 rotations in psychiatry. Psychiatry has usually 2 intakes, and obviously I'll tell a bit more in our other podcast. But the reason why I asked for 2 was because the second one was my backup in case I couldn't get through to the first one. And so I got my 2 rotations, kept going through as per usual. But there was a tricky bit over there, was that I had a change of 3 directors in those 3 terms. So I had to go and express my interest to one.
Change of 3 psychiatry
directors. So I'd go and express my interest to one and try and impress them, try and be proactive in my approach and do presentations and whatnot. And then he'd be gone. And another one would come, and then he'd be gone.
That's tricky.
So that's why I thought, all right, in case this department loses any more directors, I need to have another backup rotation, which is why I asked for the 3rd one. I mean, that would have been 3rd in a row. Ideally, 1 or 2 rotations is enough for you to express your interest and to show that that's how things work. And that was basically it. I got my general registration. I did what was asked of me by the consultants there. And by this time, the consultants had started to vouch for me. Because they'd been seeing me for over 6 months.
Yeah.
And I went to all the consultants who were working there, like, yes, absolutely. And they went in and told the director that we have a doctor here who's willing to stay in this city, who's willing to participate and stay here for as long as he needs to. Why don't we give him an opportunity? Because this director was, again, very new.
Yeah.
So they vouched for me. They went and spoke for me. And the director said, yeah, all right, fine. I've not met this chap, but if everybody is here who's saying the right things, and this is all about basically being respectful and mindful of what your consultants or your registrars want. And that was basically it. I got my interview, and it was a 3-part interview because it was a long process to get there. But then, yes, and by 2021, midway through 2021, I started working as a registrar.
Yep. So this is pretty amazing because you did the observership program. You landed the job in the hospital that you did the observership program on. You did your WBA. You got your general registration. Then you did some psych terms, and then you got officially onto the Australian training program, and you're on your way to be a qualified psychiatrist in Australia. And this is all at the same workplace, and really within the space of 2.5 years, which is pretty amazing.
Yes, from the start of my observership until the day I became a registrar was a process of about 2.5 years.
Which is incredible. And that's why I think this in particular is such a success story, because you went in, you didn't waste time, you played the game well, you did all the right things, you knew what you wanted, you went for it, and you kind of always had a strategy in everything that you did. There was always a strategy behind it. And you managed to get on getting onto these specialty training programs as an IMG. it's not impossible, but it does require a bit of extra work, I feel. And you have to go out there and you have to really prove yourself.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Now that I say it out loud, it sounds like I was strategized. It sounds like I was organized, but I probably feel like I have undiagnosed ADHD and take that from a psych registrar.
So saying all that, this is an incredible IMG success story. And for the people that are listening, I hope you've heard this and you can feel the hope, because this person's telling you that they were just a PGY2 with a crappy broken CV with a little bit of work here, a little bit of work there. They went up against some really seasoned doctors in the Observership program. They landed the job, and within 2.5 years, they're on an Australian training program. Like, you should be so proud of yourself. I'm absolutely inspired by you.
Well, it does some days still feel unreal.
It does, doesn't it?
2.5 years later.
Yeah.
But it's possible.
It absolutely
happened.
is.
And sometimes I have to keep telling myself that. And so I tell this to all our listeners that don't shy away from taking that extra step. Do it and think about the consequences later. Sometimes that's the only way it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
I feel like I'm already hooked onto this.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to tell everyone my story.
The other thing is, everyone that we put in front of the mic gets so addicted to podcasting. They love it. So you just, yeah.
Yes, I wonder why I didn't do this before.
Exactly. So this is where we're going to end part 2, and we're going to invite Dr. Faraz back in part 3, where he's going to discuss his tips and his best advice to help you improve as an IMG doctor working in Australia. But we also have a YouTube channel that we put all these podcasts to, and we actually put all these podcasts earlier than our social media accounts. So if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, then please head over there and click the subscribe button. Other than that, it's been an absolute pleasure with Dr. Faraz, and I hope you found this extremely informative, and we'll catch you in the next podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you for being here. Take care.